Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. Gordon, first of all, welcome back.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Gordon, we're back for one of our quarterly check-ins in your
Yeah.
world of the legal world of podcasting. We have not had a chance to get together for a podcast since Podfest Expo 2024 in late January in Orlando. But I wanted to, like I said, check in, see what you're up to, what you've got coming up, and maybe some of the issues that you're at least seeing in the podcast world. So I wanted to maybe start off by asking, are there any court cases that have percolated up to your attention that podcasters need to be aware of?
I'm not sure how important they are for podcasters right now, but it's always good to know what's going on. And there have been a couple. This is a fairly low volume industry for litigation. Often, I think, just because there's much money at stake for most typical podcasters, who's going to sue over a few $100 in revenue. But a couple of them have been reported just in the last couple of weeks. There's a copyright case and a trademark. So let me run down. The copyright case is called Thick Boy Productions versus Kyle Swindells, and Swindells goes by the moniker Uniqueness. So what Uniqueness does is these like reaction videos and reaction episodes of content where he's reacting to somebody else's content. Thick Boy Productions is a podcaster. They produce episodes of a show called The Fighter and the Kid, and it's a hosted show by Brendan Schaub, and that podcast is both video and audio. And they put out the episode. The content of the episode isn't really what's important, but Swindells, this Uniqueness, has a YouTube channel where he does videos where reacting to that content. We've all seen those, right? The host of the reaction video in a picture in picture responding, and you see their facial things. And it's pretty widely held that this is an acceptable, fair use transformation of the stuff. And sure enough, Thick Boy decides we don't. Maybe he didn't like what was said about his show, but ultimately sued in federal court for the District of Rhode Island, of all places. And on a motion for summary judgment, Swindells, the defendant, who represented himself pro se, I guess they call it, he made a motion for summary judgment on the basis that what he's doing is fair use. And after some analysis in a 13-page opinion, the judge in the case agreed and said, yeah, case dismissed, fair use, you're done. And so that is proof of this notion that these reaction videos, and I presume reaction audio could do the same thing, counts as fair use. It's transforming the original, it's creating a new kind of content. So that's what fair use is really all about, is let's build on what's gone before and make something new and different. So that's kind of interesting. And I guess good news for creators who like to do that content.
That leads me perhaps into our next area of
Yeah.
AI.
Hmm.
And I know there's been some litigation in the AI arena separate and apart from podcasts, but really I wanted to see if you've had the chance to maybe utilize AI in any way. Is it helping you with your efficiencies or what your thoughts are at this point?
Yes, very much. I am using AI. I was talking to my wife about this last night. I said, I think I probably check into ChatGPT at least once a day for some reason or another. Maybe it's just to quickly craft a more eloquently worded Facebook post or something like that. And sometimes really in the content creation process. Now, what's important, I want to make sure everybody's clear is I treat it as a tool, not a crutch, not a replacement for my work in writing and creating content. Although the tools are getting better and better to the point where I think we're going to see content that's made entirely by AI. Someone just gives it a prompt and out comes a podcast episode. Whether there's value in that will be something that the audiences will have to decide. But I do use AI. I have a show called Legit Podcast Pro, where every Thursday I cover a topic of interest in the legal and business and tips and tricks for podcasters. And I generally start by coming up with ideas, oftentimes looking at metrics from YouTube and podcast hosting analysis, and what's a topic that hasn't been covered in a while that does well, and then plug that into ChatGPT and I say, give me 10 possible topics covering this subject matter. And then I'll ask it to give me 10 possible titles for an episode on the topic that rings truest for me. From there, give me an outline for an episode. And Sometimes even a section of that outline will be, what would that section talk about? I have tried to have it write a whole script, and it generally doesn't come out sounding enough like me, but it's a great jumping off point as a tool for streamlining the creation process. And then I make it my own and deliver it. And I think that's really valuable. But there's a legal side to that thing, and that is that the stuff that comes out of the AI machine is not copyrightable. I'm not entitled to claim ownership of that outline, or if it writes the whole script. One of the reasons I write the scripts myself is I want to claim ownership of that. So if somebody copies me, I have a recourse. But that's the courts and the copyright authorities have basically said if it isn't human generated, it isn't entitled to copyright protection. So that's something to be thinking about. The other legal side of AI, of course, is the number of lawsuits going on against the various AI makers, the companies behind AIs. The claims have to do with how the material that the AIs were trained on was ingested and used basically without permission from the owners, the copyright holders, and also the outputs being too similar to the material that was ingested originally. The lawsuits aren't going super well for the plaintiffs, to be honest. The one case involves Sarah Silverman and a number of other authors who are suing OpenAI and Microsoft. And they had most of their claims dismissed on the back end, the outputs, because they just hadn't pled the case in a way that the court could really address. The input side stuff is still there, but we have to wonder. And the AIs are arguing fair use in their defense, saying, "Hey, we're making something different. This is not a substitute experience for consuming Sarah Silverman's book. We're training a machine to make new things. And we're creating software, not literature." But ultimately, it's the materials used. So we're going to see. These cases are going to go on for a while. There's a case in England going on that deals with images. Getty Images is the plaintiff, and one of the plaintiffs in that case against Stable Diffusion, I think, and some of the others. And the New York Times is suing Microsoft and OpenAI over the ingestion, and it's actually possible to prompt the machine to output the exact text of a New York Times article from 1986 or something. So that is pretty smoking gun evidence of copyright infringement right there, I think. So that's what we're looking forward to in the next year or so, probably, on the AI front.
Let me go back to, where you started with AI
Yeah.
and AI as a tool,
Yeah,
and
sure.
I absolutely agree with you, and I teach a class at, a law school on legal and regulatory compliance, and they called me this week to ask me what my thoughts were about allowing students to use AI for open book tests, for instance.
Yeah.
And my views have evolved. Last summer, I said absolutely not. This summer, I say absolutely for 2 reasons.
Right.
One is you're right, it's a tool, and as a
Mhm.
tool, law students need to be familiar with the tools available to them.
Yeah.
But what I tell people is it may give you something, but like every first year associate, you have to check every citation, and the
Right.
cases that we've probably both laughed at where lawyers have turned in briefs written by AI, that who could be that stupid? It actually drove home the message to me, I learned
Yeah.
as a young associate, which is you have to double check every citation, and when you turn that into the partner and he says, "Okay, tell me about this case," you better have read
You
that
better have an
case,
answer. Yeah.
and you better have an answer, and that taught me to check cites. And so I view it in that way, and at least in the legal world, AI doesn't have cases literally up to today. It's maybe 2 years behind.
Yeah.
It's not gonna give you the most current cases, but the point is, you have to know the subject matter even if you use AI. As you said, you can certainly use it as a research tool or perhaps to craft some language,
Yeah.
but if you don't know the answer, you have to go study it to make sure you get it. But I think really everyone needs to be familiar with that tool as
Right on.
well. In my other life, I followed data privacy,
Sure.
and obviously the state of California is leading, I think, the US effort in that. Do you see the state of California moving to regulate AI in any way since we don't seem to be able to get any kind of federal rule or law in place?
I haven't heard too much about the state diving into that area, but knowing our legislature, I won't be at all surprised if they come up with something crazy strong. that will shake up the industry a bit. The other side of it, of course, is many of these AI companies have big operations here in California. Maybe I don't know, the tax base, if they care so much about that. But we have some progressive legislators who are really aggressive in their approach to things, and as we've seen, the labor front and things like that in the last few years. So it wouldn't surprise me, but I do think that it needs a more comprehensive solution across the state lines. I think we're going to need some kind of federal approach to it. And the problem is getting the federal legislative body to do anything and accomplish anything real other than pointing fingers at each other is a challenge, isn't it? So I think it's a long time away before we actually see meaningful change. And hopefully it's an industry that will start to regulate itself to avoid heavy handed government intervention. Money talks.
We turn to another topic that we hear about, which is podcasting 2.0.
Mhm.
And I have to admit, I've not taken a complete deep dive in it, but to me, it seems like a natural evolution in our industry. We've both been doing this for some length of time, and we have seen evolution, and we'll continue to see evolution. Do you see podcasting 2.0 is really just a natural progression forward, or is it really something different?
I think it is a natural progression forward. And I am by no means an expert or that even that well versed on what it means and what it brings. But I think that look, we have to evolve as an industry. We have to keep up and maybe even lead the lead on technology. And this is a way of coming into the next era of podcasting. There are those in the podcast hosting companies that think it's much ado about nothing and that it's really just whatever. Has gotten on board a little bit. There's new protocol, and really it's just defining a protocol for the RSS format that allows podcasting to work the way it works. And one of the things I really like about it is that they did add a transcript tag, and they've added a way of micropayments. If you sign up with the right listening tools and the right hosting, you can actually tap into the opportunity to get little payments from in crypto for based on the number of minutes a listener listens to. They could volunteer to pay you a fraction of a Bitcoin for every 10 minutes they listen or something like that. And that's a nice idea of a way to monetize something maybe a little bit. Again, uptake is going to be slow. The transcript tag is the one that I think is the most exciting, and that Apple has now adopted that. And they're actually creating transcripts by default. Raises an interesting question of, well, what if you don't want them to? Do you have to opt in to allowing it, or can you opt out of allowing them to transcribe? Because in copyright law, a transcription is a derivative work of the original thing. And so the copyright owner has the right to say yes or no to that and be in charge. And I think there are other concerns around, well, once the transcript is out, that means that the content could be used and ingested by the AIs for training more easily. Like, AIs can transcribe things too. But it raises a bunch of questions. Apple solves that by just saying, hey, you want to keep being listed on Apple, you got to click this box and accept these terms of service. So now they have a contractual right to do it. And I don't know anybody who doesn't want to keep their show on Apple Podcasts. That's that.
So that really leads to at least a couple of other topics in my
Sure.
mind. Let's stick with Apple around their change, I think in December, around how they evaluated, I guess, downloads, but maybe it's more sophisticated than that. They did that in a way that I think we didn't know it was coming, at least. And it
Yeah.
changed the way downloads were measured. And it didn't just impact Apple. I think it really impacted across the industry and multiple platforms.
Yeah, I think so. I think it was I think it was a little earlier, maybe October or something. But yeah, it was a surprise change. They just basically said, guess what? We've changed the way Apple Podcasts, the listening tool, works. So it's less about measurement. It involves measurement. But what they've done is they've said, look, we know that a lot of people subscribe to podcasts and then never listen to the episodes, but their phone is downloading those episodes. And so that counts as a download. We know that they're not listening. So we're going to change the way the phone works and not have it download episodes. So if you haven't listened to an episode in a couple of maybe 3 episodes, it stops automatically downloading them. So that means that you and I and everybody else who has shows listed on Apple Podcasts saw a big drop in the number of downloads. That's the metric that the advertising industry has been using. It's a metric we've all been using just to measure our success for whatever that means. But the advertising industry uses it on determining how much advertisers pay for access to your audience. So if you used to have 10,000 downloads a month and now you've got 7,000 downloads a month, that's a 30% drop. And that seems to be what people are saying has happened to them. Does that mean a 30% drop in your income? In the short term, I think that is what it means. But I do think that it was an appropriate adjustment to make. It's too bad that Apple is the one that had to make it as a fait accompli for the rest of us to just, oh, yeah, okay. But I think it makes sense because we know that a lot of listeners aren't actually listeners. Downloads aren't listens. And there's no way to determine who's really listening. I think what it leads to is eventually adjustment in advertising rates going up to accommodate the fact that the advertisers are still getting the same value on that 70% number that they used to get on the 100% number. So at some point, there will be an equalization of things. And in the meantime, of course, the little guy podcaster that's counting on that revenue is feeling the pinch. In the long run, I think it's good that we're getting better way to have accurate numbers.
And you also mentioned transcripts and captioning.
Mm.
That's Apple, I think, made those available uh, with this change. Where do you see that component for podcasters, recognizing that we actually have a law that may influence some of your thoughts around that? But also, how do you see that really from the business side of things as well?
Let me talk about the law. It's in the US, we have the Americans with Disabilities. And I've been talking about this for a few years that the law requires many businesses of a certain size and stature to provide a reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities. Now that means wheelchair ramps in retail establishments. It means braille on the bank machines that we use and those kinds of things. And it means that who are hearing impaired need to have access to the material in another format. And transcripts and captioning seems to be the format that the deaf community needs. You can't have captioning unless you have a transcript. So the availability of transcripts is a step in the right direction, and the ability to put captions on the screen of the device you're listening to so that the deaf consumer can access it, I think is the way we comply with the law. And we're getting to a point now where if Apple's doing transcripts for free, you can't argue it's an unwieldy and a burdensome cost to make a transcript and to make that available. So I've been doing it for a few years. I've had a computerized transcription as part of my automated workflow that it creates an HTML page that I can link to in my show notes. And that's how I've been doing it. But I think captioning is the next phase, and we're going to see more and more of that. And I think the 2.0 protocol is making strides in that direction as well. Can't be sure, but that's from a business standpoint, I think it's just smart business to be as available for anyone who wants it as possible, assuming it doesn't cost, assuming the return on investment makes sense. And again, the cost structure of this is a factor. So if it doesn't cost too much, then I would say we just do it and accept it as a part of the way we operate.
Gordon, let me turn to some of the initiatives that the Firemark Law Firm and Gordon Firemark have put on. You've got a lot going. You have multiple sites and you've got a speech or two coming up. And so I was wondering if you could wrap us up with what's going on in the law firm world or the Gordon Firemark podcasting world and then your upcoming talk.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. What I try to do is have something available for everyone at every stage of their journey in the creative process. I'm an entertainment lawyer. I do a lot of work in the podcasting space, but also with filmmakers and theater makers and folks in the television industry and other related fields. And I really try to put out a lot of information because I believe knowledge is power and education is important, and try to give access to a lot of information for free. But then I have something for the do-it-yourselfer and something for, obviously, as a lawyer, we do done-for-you services. That's the top level of my business ladder, I guess you could say. But I want to be able to help people who can't necessarily afford to hire a lawyer. So I provide information products and courses and things like that. And it's all available. My law firm is firemark.com, but gordonfiremark.com, my full name, is where I have hosting and links to my book, my podcasts, and my online courses. I have a course called Easy Legal for Podcasters where I actually teach folks how to do it yourself, how to form your corporation or LLC, how to register your trademarks and copyright, how to make the contracts with your team that make sure you own everything. And of course, the almighty dollar to monetize, how to make contracts when you're monetizing your show so that you know you're going to get paid and you can actually collect and those kinds of things. And that's like a template library with lots of instructions and explanation. So, like I said, something at every price point so people at every level can access the stuff I do. And back to that sort of free information side, I'm out there speaking at the conferences. We both spoke at Podfest in Florida a few weeks ago and had a great time doing that. This time, this March, it's March 27th, I'll be speaking at the Podcast Movement Evolutions Conference here in LA. I'm actually doing a panel, not a panel, it's me and another lawyer, Lindsay Bowen, who's a friend and colleague and another great podcasting familiar attorney. We are doing a mock negotiation covering the sort of high points of a talent acquisition deal by a network or studio. And we're going through what some of the provisions mean and how we would negotiate on behalf of our clients and those kinds of things. Should be a fun session. A lot to cover in 30 minutes, but it'll be good. And then in April, I'm going to be speaking along with Jared Easley and Dan Franks at the National Association of Broadcasters in Las Vegas. Just there, it's just going to be sharing my story about how podcasting has allowed me to have a practice that is unlike most
Right.
and a really satisfying and rewarding practice. So that's going to be fun too. So that'll be April 14th. So
Yeah, that's a great conference as well, even if it's
yeah,
a little bit broader than simply podcasting.
yep, yep. Well, and that's a fun one because you get to see all the technology that's on behind the scenes on the television industry. So
Right.
it'll be fun.
Gordon, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but before we leave, if our listeners wanted more information on you, the law firm, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
You can go to thepodcastlawyer.com. That's the podcast facing side of me. And as I said before, gordonfiremark.com is the main website where all my other stuff is available. So follow me on social media. G Firemark is my handle most places. Love to be in touch.
Gordon, I appreciate you taking the time to check in. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thanks, Tom. It's always a pleasure. Glad to be here.